3 weeks ago my mother rang my doorbell. First time in 9 years. She was thinner than I remembered, holding a manila envelope against her chest like it might fall apart if she let go. I almost didn't recognize the woman standing on my porch as the same one who stamped my wedding invitation reject and mailed it back 9 years ago. I let her in anyway. The envelope was not an apology. It was a spreadsheet, handwritten, blue ink, 11 lines. College tuition she said she covered. The car. A down payment she never made. Every line had a $sign. At the bottom, circled twice, $925,000. You owe this family, she said. It's time to pay it back. But here is what my mother did not know, sitting in my living room with her envelope. I had been keeping a list of my own for 9 years. And unlike hers, every single line on it was true. I grew up in a house in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, where love came with conditions nobody bothered to write down, but everybody understood. My mother, Linda Whitmore, ran our house the way she ran her book club, with an agenda, a hierarchy, and a very clear sense of who was allowed to disappoint her. My younger brother, Tyler, was never on that list. It wasn't cruelty, not at first. It was arithmetic. Tyler struggled in school, so Linda hired him tutors. I made honor roll every semester, so Linda assumed I didn't need anything, and mostly she was right. That's the trap of being the reliable one. Nobody protects you because you've never given them a reason to think you need protecting. My father, Richard, worked long hours at a marine supply company and mostly stayed out of it. He wasn't cruel either. He was absent in the specific way fathers are absent when they've decided keeping the peace is easier than keeping score. By the time I was 17, I understood the family currency system perfectly. Tyler got grace. I got expectations. When Tyler wrecked his car at 19, Linda cried on the phone with her sister about how hard things were for him. When I got a B+ in AP Calculus, Linda asked what happened. I left for the University of Georgia and didn't look back, not out of anger, just relief. I studied accounting because I liked things that balanced. Numbers didn't play favorites. A ledger didn't have a favorite child. I met Marcus Bennett my second year in a study room in the business library at 11 at night, both of us pretending we weren't procrastinating on the same final. He was studying supply chain management, originally from Savannah, the kind of person who remembered small details about people, that I took my coffee black, that I hated when people chewed with their mouth open, that I flinched slightly whenever my phone rang with my mother's name on the screen. Marcus was steady in a way my family never was. He showed up. He didn't keep score. When I told him about growing up in Linda's house, the tutors for Tyler, the silence for me, he didn't try to fix it or explain it away. He just said, "That's not normal, Grace. That's not what parents are supposed to do." Nobody had ever said that to me so plainly before. I'd spent 20 years thinking the imbalance was just how families worked. We dated for 3 years. I brought him home twice. Both times, Linda was polite in the specific brittle way she was polite to people she'd already decided not to like. She never said anything overtly wrong. She asked him what his father did for a living. She asked how much debt he'd graduated with. She asked once in front of him whether I'd really thought this through, like Marcus was a car I was considering financing. I told myself it was nerves. I told myself she'd come around. When Marcus proposed on the pier in Charleston, I said yes before he finished the sentence. I called Linda that same night, still crying happy tears, and there was a pause on the line I still remember. Not congratulations. Pause. Then, well, I hope you know what you're doing. I should have heard that pause for what it was. Instead I heard what I wanted to hear, which was a mother who just needed time. Planning the wedding, the cracks widened into something I could no longer explain away as nerves. Linda had opinions about the guest list that weren't really about the guest list. She wanted Tyler's entire fraternity invited, people I'd never met, while questioning why I needed so many of my own college friends there. She suggested more than once that we push the date so it wouldn't compete with Tyler's upcoming promotion celebration, as though my wedding were an item on his calendar that needed his approval first. Marcus watched all of this with the patient, careful eyes of someone doing math he didn't like the answer to. "Your mom doesn't want you to get married," he said one night gently, like he was handing me something breakable. "She wants you to stay exactly where you've always been. Youthful. Available. Second place." I didn't want to believe him. I told him he was wrong, that Linda just had a complicated way of showing love, that this was simply who she was and I'd made peace with it years ago. I hadn't made peace with it. I'd made a habit of it. There's a difference, and it took me years to understand which one I was actually doing. 3 weeks before the wedding, Linda called to ask casually whether Marcus had considered a prenup, given that I was the one with the real career. He framed it as looking out for me. It landed like something else entirely, like she was already drafting the ledger she'd hand me on my porch 9 years later, though of course, I had no way of knowing that yet. I mailed the invitations myself, all 140 of them, licking envelopes at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and Marcus doing the return address labels beside me. I remember exactly how it felt sealing my parents' envelope. A small, stupid flicker of hope that this, finally, might be the thing that brought Linda fully onto my side. I had no idea what was coming back in the mail 3 weeks later. I had no idea that a single red stamp was about to tell me, more honestly than 9 years of pauses and passive comments ever had, exactly where I stood. The invitation came back on a Tuesday. I remember the date because I'd just gotten off a call confirming the final headcount with our caterer, feeling that particular high of a wedding finally actually coming together. I checked the mailbox on my way inside and there it was, sitting on top of a stack of bills. My own envelope, my own handwriting, the one I'd addressed to Richard and Linda Whitmore 3 weeks earlier. At first I thought it was returned for insufficient postage. I'd been rushing that night, and it wouldn't have been the first time I'd miscounted a stamp. Then I turned it over. Stamped across the front in red ink, bold enough that it had bled slightly into the paper. Reject. Not return to sender. Not a postal error code. A single word, stamped like a judgment, like a permission slip that had failed inspection. I stood in my driveway for a long time just looking at it. My hands were shaking in a way that had nothing to do with the October air. I opened it, my own invitation unread, still sealed when it left my house, and found something tucked inside that I hadn't put there. A note in my mother's handwriting for sentences long. "We can't in good conscience celebrate this. You know how we feel about this decision. When you come to your senses, we'll be here. Until then, don't ask us to pretend." Not one word about Marcus by name. Not one specific complaint I could argue with or address. Just a verdict, stamped and mailed back like return merchandise, like I was a package Linda had decided not to accept delivery of. I called her. She let it ring 4 times before picking up, and when she did, her voice had the same brittle politeness she used with people she'd already decided not to like. "I don't know what you expected me to say, Grace," she said. "You made your choice. This is ours." "He has a name," I said. "You've met him twice. You know his name. This isn't about him specifically." A pause, the kind she was good at, the kind that always made me fill in the silence with my own doubt. "It's about you throwing away everything we built for you. The tutoring, the private lessons, the everything, Grace. And for what? For someone who'll never really understand where you came from." I asked her what that meant. She wouldn't say it plainly. She never said the ugly part plainly. That was never her way. She let you assemble it yourself out of pauses and half sentences, so that if you ever repeated it back to her, she could say you'd misunderstood. "I'm not doing this over the phone," she said instead. "If you marry him, that's your decision. But don't expect us to stand there and act like it's something to celebrate." I got married 3 weeks later on a Saturday in November, in a small chapel outside Charleston with 60 guests, string lights, and my father-in-law walking me down the aisle because my own father hadn't RSVP'd at all. Marcus's mother cried through the entire ceremony. Mine wasn't there to cry through anything. I didn't fall apart during the ceremony. I want to be clear about that because I've thought about it a lot since, how I managed to smile, say my vows steady, dance with Marcus under lights I'd picked out myself, all while carrying a wound that fresh. I think some part of me had already been rehearsing that particular kind of composure my whole life. 26 years of practice, keeping the disappointment invisible, showing up steady no matter what had just been taken from me. It was during the reception, standing near the gift table, that Tyler's ex-girlfriend, someone I barely knew, who'd apparently come as someone's plus one, mentioned offhand that she'd heard my parents were hosting Tyler's promotion party the same weekend. Big thing, Whitmore Marine's expanding the Charleston office, your mom's doing the whole catering setup and everything, she said, not realizing what she was telling me, not realizing she was handing me the last piece of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to finish. My wedding and Tyler's party. The same weekend. Linda hadn't been too heartbroken over my decision to skip. She'd simply had somewhere else to be. I didn't cry that night. I remember that specifically because everyone who checked on me seemed to expect I would, and I kept surprising them by not needing to. I think the crying had already happened slowly over about 15 years, in small enough doses that by the time the big rejection arrived, stamped in red ink on my own handwriting, there wasn't much water left to spend on it. What I felt instead, standing there in my wedding dress with cake frosting still on my fingers, was something quieter and much more permanent. I decided that night that I was done asking Linda Whitmore to see me. I had no idea, packing that stamped envelope away in a drawer instead of throwing it out, that I'd just filed the very first page of a ledger that would take me 9 years to finish. Year 1, I didn't speak to my parents at all. Not out of some grand declaration. There was no dramatic phone call announcing I was cutting them off. It was quieter than that. They didn't call. I didn't call. The silence just kept extending itself week by week, until eventually it had a shape of its own, solid enough that breaking it would have taken more effort than maintaining it. Marcus and I moved into a small rental in West Ashley that first year. A 2-bedroom with a leaky faucet and a landlord who took 3 weeks to fix anything. I was working as a junior associate at a mid-sized accounting firm downtown, the kind of job where you spend your first 2 years doing other people's grunt work and telling yourself it's temporary. Marcus was climbing steadily in supply chain logistics, the kind of steady, unglamorous progress that doesn't make headlines but pays a mortgage. I threw myself into work in a way that probably wasn't entirely healthy, though I didn't see it that way at the time. I told myself I just liked the work. And I did. There was something deeply satisfying about forensic accounting specifically, the process of taking a mess of numbers that didn't make sense and pulling at threads until they did. Every discrepancy had an explanation if you were patient enough to find it. Every number that didn't balance was hiding a story. I was good at finding those stories. I think looking back, some part of me had been training for this specific skill my entire childhood, cataloging small imbalances, keeping mental ledgers of who got what and who got overlooked long before I ever got paid to do it professionally. I got my CPA license in year 2. I remember calling my father-in-law, not my own father, to tell him, and the warmth in his voice on the other end of that call was a small, strange ache. Proof of what a normal reaction to my success was supposed to sound like, delivered by someone who wasn't actually obligated to give it to me. Somewhere in year 2, I bought a plain black 3-ring binder from an office supply store, almost as a joke to myself. I labeled the spine in careful block letters, receipts. Inside, I put the stamped, rejected wedding invitation, still sealed in its original torn envelope. Underneath it, I started keeping other things. Screenshots of birthday texts that went unanswered for weeks and then arrived with a transparent excuse. A printed email from my mother sent the week after my wedding, asking if I could help out with $1,500 toward Tyler's car repair. No acknowledgement whatsoever of what had just happened between us. I didn't send the money. I photocopied the email instead. I didn't fully understand at the time what I was building. I told myself it was just documentation, the same instinct that made me good at my job. If you're going to make an accusation later, you'd better be able to back it up with paper. I didn't consciously think I'd need it. I just couldn't stop myself from keeping it. Year 3, I made senior associate. Year 4, I left the firm to start my own forensic accounting practice, working out of a converted spare bedroom with a laptop, a second-hand desk, and exactly 2 clients I'd managed to bring with me. Marcus thought I was insane. He was right to be nervous. We lived off savings for 8 months while I built a client list, one referral at a time, mostly small businesses and a few divorce attorneys who needed someone who could trace money through complicated accounts. It was slow. Painfully slow some months. I remember sitting at that second-hand desk at 11 at night, running numbers for a client who was 3 months late paying my invoice, and thinking about how Linda would have had something to say about the risk I'd taken if I'd still been speaking to her. I thought about it and then I kept working because that was the entire point, building something no one's opinion could touch. Meanwhile, through the grapevine, my Aunt Carol mostly, who never fully cut contact and would occasionally text me updates I hadn't asked for, I heard fragments about home. Tyler had gotten a management position at my father's marine supply company, Whitmore Marine, a job I suspected had more to do with the last name on his paycheck than his qualifications. He married a woman named Ashley 2 years after my own wedding, in a ceremony Linda apparently spent 11 months planning down to the linen napkins. I wasn't invited. I didn't expect to be, and by that point I genuinely didn't mind. Year 5 was when the binder started to grow in earnest. Aunt Carol mentioned, almost in passing during a Christmas card exchange, that Whitmore Marine was going through some things. I didn't ask what that meant. I wrote the date down anyway in the front of the binder, under a section I'd started labeling Timeline. Old habits. By year 6, my practice had grown enough that I hired my first employee, a sharp young analyst named Priya Nair, fresh out of an accounting program at the College of Charleston. Priya became something unexpected to me. Not just an employee, but the kind of person who noticed things, who called me out gently when I was working too late, who eventually became one of the very few people who knew the whole story about the binder in my bottom drawer. She was the closest thing I had in those years to the sister I'd never really had in Ashley, or in Tyler's increasingly distant orbit. "Why do you still keep that stuff?" Priya asked me once, late one evening, after she'd finally worked up the nerve to ask about the folder she'd occasionally seen me pull from the drawer and quietly return. I didn't have a good answer for her then. "In case I need it," I said. I didn't know yet what I'd need it for. I just knew, the way you know certain things about your own family without being able to fully explain them, that I would. Year 7, my practice cleared 6 figures for the first time. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot after signing a contract with a client that would have seemed impossible 3 years earlier, and feeling an emotion I didn't expect. Not triumph exactly, but something quieter. Vindication that had nowhere to go because there was no one at home to show it to who would have actually understood what it cost me to get there. That was also the year Aunt Carol let something slip that I filed away carefully without reacting to it out loud. "Your mother asks about you, you know," she said. "Not to me directly. But she looks you up sometimes. LinkedIn, I think." Tyler showed her how. I didn't respond to that the way Carol probably expected. I didn't feel warmth at the idea of Linda checking on me. I felt something colder and more useful. Information. If she was watching my success from a distance, she'd eventually find a reason to reappear. People like Linda didn't reconnect out of longing. They reconnected when the math started to make sense to them again. Year 8, Whitmore Marine's financial troubles, which Carol had been vaguely alluding to for 2 years, apparently became serious enough that even Tyler's protected position couldn't insulate him from it. I heard secondhand that there'd been a round of layoffs, that Tyler's promised promotion had quietly evaporated, that Linda had been overheard at church describing the situation as a rough patch. I wrote the date down. I didn't feel triumph about that either, not really. What I felt was closer to recognition. The particular unpleasant clarity of watching a pattern you'd predicted actually arrive. By the start of year 9, my practice had 12 employees and a client roster that included 2 of the largest family-owned businesses in the Lowcountry. Marcus and I had bought a house of our own in Mount Pleasant, not far, ironically, from the house I'd grown up in. I hadn't set foot in my parents' house in 9 years. I hadn't heard my mother's voice in 9 years. except once briefly at a funeral for my grandmother 2 years earlier, where we'd exchanged exactly 11 words and nothing more. The binder by then had grown from a single folder into an actual 3-inch ring binder with labeled tabs. Priya had helped me organize it properly one Sunday afternoon, treating it with the same careful professional rigor she brought to an actual audit, though neither of us said out loud exactly what we thought it might someday be used for. Wedding invitation. Unanswered messages. The $1,500 request. The Christmas cards that arrived some years and not others, always correlating suspiciously with whatever Linda happened to need that particular season. 9 years of small, careful, dated proof that I had not imagined any of it. I told myself most days that the binder was just closure. A way of proving to myself that I hadn't overreacted, that the wound had been real. I told myself I'd probably never actually need it for anything. I was wrong about that. I just didn't know yet how wrong or how soon I'd find out. Because 3 weeks before my mother rang my doorbell for the first time in 9 years, something happened that I wouldn't fully understand the significance of until much later. A small, strange spike in my LinkedIn profile views, 17 of them in a single week from accounts I didn't recognize, all connected when I finally checked to people who worked at or around Whitmore Marine. I didn't think much of it at the time. I filed it away the way I filed everything. I had no idea I was being watched. I had no idea that somewhere across town, my mother wasn't just thinking about reconnecting. She was doing math. I found out what my mother had actually been planning 11 days after she showed up on my porch with her spreadsheet, and I didn't find it through her. I found it through Ashley. Tyler's wife and I had never been close, but we'd stayed loosely, distantly cordial over the years, mostly through the kind of surface-level social media interactions that don't require actual conversation. A liked photo here, a birthday comment there. So when she messaged me directly out of nowhere asking if we could talk, I almost didn't respond. Something about the tone of it, careful, a little anxious, made me answer anyway. We met at a coffee shop in Mount Pleasant, not far from my office. Ashley looked tired in a way I recognized, the specific exhaustion of someone who's been carrying something they didn't ask to carry. "I need to show you something," she said before I'd even finished ordering. "And I need you to know I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it because I can't keep pretending I don't know." She turned her phone around and showed me a group chat. Family group. Whitmore, the header read, a chat I'd been removed from years ago and hadn't thought about since. Ashley had stayed in it. So had Linda, Richard, Tyler, and, I noticed with a small cold drop in my stomach, my Aunt Carol, whom I'd trusted for 9 years to give me honest, unfiltered updates. The messages started roughly 6 weeks earlier. Linda. Grace's firm made the Post and Courier's business section. 12 employees now. Charleston Regional Business Journal too. Tyler. Of course she does the one thing that makes her impossible to reach out to normally. Linda. It's not impossible. It just needs to be handled the right way. She has a soft spot, she always did, she just buries it under all that control. Then 3 weeks before the porch visit from Linda. I did some math on everything we put into her before the wedding. Tuition, the car at 16, the trip to Europe for her 18th, the down payment help we discussed for her first apartment even though it fell through. It adds up to a real number. If I present it the right way, not angry, just factual, she'll feel the weight of it. She's an accountant. She respects numbers more than feelings. Tyler. Whitmore Marine really needs this, Mom. Be careful how you play it. Don't spook her before you get the number out. Linda. I know how to talk to my own daughter, Tyler. I sat in that coffee shop and read it twice, then a third time, my coffee going cold in front of me. There it was, stated plainly, months before she'd ever appeared at my door with her folder and her 4 sentences about paying it back. Not grief. Not a mother reaching for reconciliation. A calculated pitch, workshopped in a group chat, timed to a Business Journal article about my company's growth. "Whitmore Marine's in real trouble," Ashley said quietly once I finally looked up. "Worse than a rough patch. Tyler's been telling me for months there may be 90 days from insolvency if something doesn't change. Your mother co-signed a line of credit for the business 2 years ago. If it goes under, that debt is hers too. I asked her the number. She didn't fully know it, but she knew enough. Somewhere close to $1 million in exposure between the business debt and Linda and Richard's own mortgage, refinanced twice to keep the company afloat. $925,000 wasn't a wound Linda was trying to heal. It was a number she needed, dressed up as one. Why are you telling me this? I asked Ashley. You've got a lot more to lose here than I do. She was quiet for a moment, turning her cup in her hands. Because Tyler got everything in that house his whole life. The tutoring, the second chances, the job he didn't earn. And I watched what it did to him. He still can't hold a job without someone's name attached to it, still can't handle being told no. I don't want that for our kids. And I don't think what your family did to you should get to work. Not because of some math your mother did on a spreadsheet. I thanked her. I meant it genuinely, in a way that surprised me. Some small, unguarded part of me that still wasn't used to anyone in that family's orbit choosing honesty over convenience. I drove home that night and went straight to my office, to the bottom drawer, and pulled out the binder for the first time in months. I added one more thing to the front section, printed and dated. A screenshot of the group chat Ashley had sent me. 9 years of receipts. And now, finally, the receipt that explained all the others. The one proving that this had never once, not for a single day, been about missing me. I closed the binder and sat there a long time in the quiet of my office, thinking about the second meeting I already knew was coming. Linda hadn't gotten her number the first time. She wasn't going to disappear quietly. I had no idea that night just how far she was willing to go to get it. Linda called 4 days after I met with Ashley. Not a text this time. A call which told me something on its own. Linda didn't call unless she'd decided the stakes had changed. I think we got off on the wrong foot, she said when I picked up. I'd like to come by again. Properly this time. Maybe your father comes too. I almost laughed. Properly. As if the first visit had simply been a rough draft. Sunday, I said. 2 o'clock. I'll be ready. I want to be honest about something. I spent that week not stewing in anger, but preparing, the way I'd prepare for any client meeting where I already knew the numbers didn't add up and the other side didn't know I knew it yet. I went through the binder page by page with Priya on Saturday afternoon, laying everything out chronologically on my dining room table. The stamped invitation. The unanswered birthday texts. The $1,500 request mailed a week after my wedding. The group chat screenshot, printed in careful black and white. 9 years, organized into 11 labeled tabs. You don't have to do this alone, Priya said, watching me close the binder for the last time before Sunday. I could be there. Or Marcus. Marcus is going to be there, I said. But this part, the actual math, I need to do myself. He spent my whole life making it about numbers. I'm going to speak her language one last time and then I'm done. If you've ever had to sit across from someone who hurt you and stay completely calm while they tried to provoke you into looking like the unreasonable one, you know exactly the kind of self-control I'm talking about. If this story feels familiar so far, drop a comment below and let me know. I want to hear how you handled it. Sunday came. Linda and Richard arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. Which was its own kind of message. Linda was never early unless she believed the meeting mattered enough to be early for. Richard looked older than I remembered, quieter, hovering slightly behind Linda the way he always had, letting her run point. I let them into the living room. Marcus sat beside me. I didn't offer coffee this time. Linda opened with the spreadsheet again, sliding it across the coffee table like it hadn't already failed once. I know this is uncomfortable, she said. But I've thought about it and I stand behind every number here. This is what we gave you, Grace. This is what a family is supposed to be able to ask for back when it needs it. Why now? I said. It wasn't really a question. Linda's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. As were your family. Because family doesn't need a reason. You need a reason, I said. I know about Whitmore Marine. I know about the line of credit you co-signed. I know you're close to $1 million underwater, and I know this, I tapped the spreadsheet, isn't about tuition from 20 years ago. It's about that. For the first time in my life, I watched my mother's composure actually crack just slightly at the edges. Richard shifted in his seat, saying nothing, which had always been his particular talent. That has nothing to do with this, Linda said too fast. It has everything to do with this. I opened my own folder. Not the whole binder yet, just a single printed page. You started planning this 6 weeks before you ever showed up here. I have the group chat, Mom. She respects numbers more than feelings. Don't spook her before you get the number out. You workshopped this like a sales pitch. The silence that followed was the kind I'd been waiting 9 years to sit inside of. Where did you? Linda started, then stopped herself because it didn't matter where. What mattered was that I had it. I'm not finished, I said, and I opened the binder. I want you to imagine the exact moment someone lays out 9 years of proof in front of the person who spent that whole time pretending none of it happened. I'll tell you what that actually looked like in just a second. But first, if you're enjoying this story, hit subscribe now, because what happens in the next few minutes is the part everyone in the comments always says they wish they could have seen in real time. I went through it in order, the way I'd have walked a client through an audit. The wedding invitation, sealed and stamped reject, still in its original torn envelope. You mailed this back to me 3 weeks before my wedding. Not a phone call. Not a conversation. A rejected package. Linda opened her mouth. Kept going. The request for $1,500 for Tyler's car 1 week after that. No apology. No acknowledgement that anything had happened. Just an ask. I laid out the birthday texts, the years they came and the years they didn't, dated and matched against a printout I'd made of Whitmore Marine's public filings. The years the company was doing well, Linda's texts arrived on time and warm. The years it wasn't, they arrived late, if at all, always followed within a month by some request, direct or implied. You're twisting this, Richard finally said quietly, the first thing he'd said since sitting down. Your mother has always. Dad, I said not unkindly, how many of my birthdays have you called me on in 9 years? He didn't answer. He looked down at his hands. It was, I think, the closest thing to honesty I'd gotten from him in my entire adult life. I set the group chat screenshot on top of the pile last. Linda stared at it like it might change if she looked at it long enough. I'm not going to yell at you, I said. I thought about it. I decided a long time ago that yelling would just give you something to point to later. See how she reacted, see how ungrateful, how dramatic. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to tell you the actual number. I slid a single page across the table. My own spreadsheet, the one Priya had helped me build, months of quiet forensic work condensed into 11 lines that mirrored Linda's exactly in format, but not in content. Every dollar Linda claimed to have spent on me, cross-referenced against actual documentation, most of which, when I'd finally pulled old bank statements and tax records during the discovery phase of building my own firm, didn't match her numbers at all. The tuition she claimed credit for turned out to be a scholarship I'd earned. The down payment help was a loan from my grandmother, repaid in full, that Linda had somehow rewritten in her memory as her own generosity. Your number is $925,000, I said. Mine is 0. Because you didn't give me what you said you gave me. You gave Tyler most of it, and you're asking me to pay for both of us. Linda didn't have a response to that. For the first time in my entire life, I watched my mother sit in complete, total silence, unable to reframe the numbers in front of her into something that favored her. I'm not paying this, I said. Not because I don't have it. I do. I could write this check tomorrow and not feel it. I'm not paying it because it was never a real debt. It was a business plan, and I refused to be your company's second line of credit. Richard stood up first. Linda, he said quietly. Let's go. Linda gathered the spreadsheet with hands that weren't quite steady, and for one strange moment, standing in my doorway, she looked at me the way I'd wanted her to look at me for 26 years. Not with an agenda, not doing math, just looking. It didn't last. By the time she reached her car, the mask was mostly back in place. But it had cracked. I'd seen it crack. And for 9 years' worth of stamped rejections and quiet math, that crack was worth more to me than any number on either of our spreadsheets. Linda didn't call after that Sunday. Not that week, not the month after. I'd expected that. What I hadn't expected was Richard. He showed up alone on a Wednesday evening about 3 weeks later, standing on my porch without calling first, looking smaller than he had the week of the confrontation. I almost didn't let him in. I did anyway. He didn't bring a spreadsheet. He didn't bring an apology dressed up as anything else either. No conditions, no, but you have to understand your mother. He just sat at my kitchen table and said, "I should have called you on your birthdays. All of them. I knew it while it was happening, and I let your mother decide what our family looked like because it was easier than disagreeing with her. I'm not asking you to fix that. I just needed to say it out loud to you one time. It wasn't everything. It didn't undo 9 years, and I told him that plainly without cruelty. But it was the first honest sentence anyone in that house had said to me since I was 17 years old, and I let myself sit with that for what it was, instead of demanding it be more." Whitmore Marine filed for a debt restructuring 5 months later. I know because it's public record and because some part of me, the forensic accountant part, will probably always keep half an eye on numbers connected to that name. Linda and Richard sold the house I grew up in. I heard through Ashley that they moved into a smaller place closer to Tyler and Ashley's, which I think was supposed to feel like closeness and probably just felt to Linda like a demotion. I never got a real apology from my mother. I stopped waiting for one somewhere around year 7 of the silence, long before the porch, long before the spreadsheet. And I think that's actually the part of this story worth saying out loud more than the confrontation itself. Because here's what I've learned sitting on the other side of it now. Closure isn't something someone else hands you. I used to think if I could just get Linda to say the right words, admit the right things, the wound would finally close. It never works that way. The binder didn't heal anything. Laying those 11 pages on the table didn't undo a single stamped rejection. What actually healed it was 9 years of building a life good enough, steady enough, mine enough, that her verdict on me stopped being the only one in the room. I still keep the binder for what it's worth. Not out of bitterness. I think I keep it the way you keep a scar. Not to reopen it, just as proof that you survived something real, and that you're allowed to remember it accurately even after everyone else has moved on. If there's one thing I'd want someone watching this to take with them, it's this. You don't owe anyone a debt for loving you conditionally. Being reliable isn't a service you're required to keep providing for free forever, to people who only remember you exist when they need something. I spent 26 years thinking love was something I had to earn back every time I disappointed someone. It took a stamped envelope and a $925,000 spreadsheet to finally teach me the truth. I never owed them anything. I never did.